So I played this really good game recently, but to talk about it, we need to talk about how we talk about games. Signalis, a survival horror game released in 2022. It's the debut game from Rose Engine, a two-person game studio from Germany. If you look on the Steam page, you can see people talking about how it's a return to the classic PlayStation-style survival horror. They praise the sound design, the tenseness, and the existential dread. But I don't want to talk about how amazing the level design is, how creepy and unsettling the enemies are, or even how it managed to make atmospheric sound work for me, a deaf person. No, I want to talk about what the game means. I want to peel back the layers of text and subtext. I want to interpret the game culturally and socially using the reference points that both it and I have to have a conversation about subtext and themes, semiotics and meaning. And we'll get there. We'll get there. But we're taking the scenic route. By the end of this video, you'll know what I think this masterpiece of a game means, and that is an important word, think. Because for a while now, the way we've talked about games and art as a whole has shifted from what we think, what we interpret, to something else. So before we get to the soft, gooey, interpretive centre of this Scotch egg, we first need to get to the meat of the issue. We need to talk about how we talk about art. So I've noticed a trend about the way we talk about art, both here on YouTube and more generally in conversation. There's this desire to solve a piece of art, to pull apart all the references and Easter eggs and try and figure out what is going to happen next. Who is going to show up next, how it's going to end, and how all the science and the timelines work. It's something I've taken to calling the mat-patification of media discussion. And this isn't just me taking pot shots at him on his way out or anything. No, I've been calling it that in private for years. I just haven't had the reason to talk about it on video until now. But the mat-patification, of course, stems from the popularity of game theory and film theory. They produce videos that are posed as media analysis and even use studies in the field of media analysis as evidence from time to time. But they try to distill plot lines into a science and claim they've solved a piece of art because they can guess what happens at the end. And in the name of finding that correct answer, that nugget of truth, all thematics, semiotics, and meaning are thrown out in the pursuit of lore. Any reference to another piece of art isn't to reflect on the themes of that piece, but instead to give a little Easter egg to the audience and gesture the possible future of the franchise. It's a really cynical and shallow way of looking at art, in my opinion, and again, just to further clarify, this is my opinion. And because of the success of these channels, imitators popped up, and now it's an entire genre of YouTube, people calling themselves theorists and trying to do science to media analysis. People who are, for all intents and purposes, just fan fiction writers, have given themselves a sciencey title to be taken more seriously. And there's nothing wrong with writing fan fiction. It is a cool and fun way to take ownership of an art piece that had an effect on you. But it doesn't make you a scientist. Because of the mass success of game theory and the theorist space, this has seeped into popular culture, becoming the correct way to analyze any piece of art. The goal is to find the objective truth hidden in any narrative, and that diverging from that in any way makes you stupid or trolling or just plain wrong. But the thing is, there is no objective way to look at art. All interpretations are molded by the experience of the reader, no matter how scientifically they present their findings. It is all subjective. But MatPat isn't entirely to blame. My man didn't entirely reconfigure how popular culture talks about art. No. He's just an identifiable figurehead. This has been a long time coming. For years now, governments and across the world have been admonishing the importance of subjects in school like media studies, English literature, sociology, and anything else that builds media literacy or critical thinking. Here in England, media studies is still considered a Mickey Mouse subject in both A-level and degree level, a phrase which was first banded around in the 1990s. And underwater basket weaving, a similar phrase used mostly in America, dates back to the 1950s. And of course, people have noticed this consistent attack and have tried to justify it in articles and papers. To quote writer James Graham,
"The kindest and most conspiracy-free interpretation of this new imbalance is that it's the accidental consequence of the solution to a real problem. The arrival of the English Baccalaureate, or EBAC, in secondary schools, and a narrower focus on STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, to to combat relatively poor numeracy and literacy levels has seen creativity slip from the priorities of many schools, not just in terms of what they spend their money on, but in terms of their philosophy of what they consider worthy. As a people, if you are told constantly that art subjects are going to reap less tangible benefits and are no longer recognized in the core curriculum, then why would you bother?
But while that is very kind, it might actually be too kind. These phrases are used to attack classes that teach pupils to look at things in a different way, to analyze the messages they're being given in media, in art, and in society. Looking at the amount of propaganda and disinformation being put out by right-wing governments and parties, is it any wonder why they want to make sure people don't question it? I mean, here in the UK, the same party that is constantly talking of defunding critical thinking and media analysis degrees is also the one putting out messages that change is not possible, that genocides are okay, and that outsiders are evil. It sounds to me like they just don't want these messages to be criticized, so they are removing people's ability to do so. Map patification is just the final form of this propaganda seeping into culture. And to get back to our starting point, when a game like Signalis comes out, a game seeping with cultural and artistic references, it just sucks that when you look for discussion about it, the first thing you find are people debating the science and the specific timelines. So let's get back to it. Back to Signalis. The way it tells its story is honestly a masterclass. The world building is immense for such a short game. There's interplanetary exploration, a fascist dictatorship, rebellion, elder gods, cloning, time loops, technology we could only dream of, and so much more. It is a deep, well thought out, and intensely complicated world. And I mean no disrespect with what I'm about to say, but that is, to me, the least interesting thing about this game. Honestly, I have no interest in figuring out these specific timelines. I have no interest in how the science behind the time loops or the flesh growths work, and I don't care what exactly bioresonance is. Because all of that is just set dressing to tell what I consider to be the real story, the real art. And that is the conversation between the game and the player, the way the game makes you feel, the comparisons the game draws between its actions and in real life, both symbolically and to other pieces of art. The game draws on such a rich body of reference material, everything from Saturn devouring his son to Neon Genesis Evangelion, and it's built in such a way that if you identify these cultural touchpoints, it can radically change how you view this art piece. But if you don't, it just washes over you without consciously making you feel like you missed anything. On its face, taken at surface level, the plot of the game doesn't make much sense. There are moments where the player jumps at random to another area, perhaps even another time, without any explanation of how or why it happened. The inside of the planet appears to be a living, breathing mess of flesh. Even the core motivations of the player character go completely unexplained, not even fully known by herself until most of the way through. It is totally possible to apply MatPat's scientific method of analysis to all these points to try and get an objective, firm timeline of events. People are trying. Look at all the attempts here on YouTube. But all you'll find is that you'll go round in circles trying to square everything with everything else, conflicting information within the game, conflicting inferences from the evidence given. It is a fool's errand, trying to make sense of it all. And even if you did manage to write a scientific breakdown of the events of the game, you wouldn't need to. Like I said before, these bits are the least interesting parts of the game. You don't need to solve the whole puzzle to see the full picture, and if anything, it might take away from you letting your emotions interpret the themes. Let your heart work before your head works. And those plot nitpicks from before, they're not complaints, don't get me wrong. They don't take away from the game at all. They put you in a frame of mind where you're taking in the tone, the mood, and the themes almost unconsciously, and those themes come through fantastically. But given they have to be translated through art, they come through differently depending on who is interpreting it. This is the kind of art piece that you can talk to 5 people about and get 6 different interpretations, and I adore that. Because remember that thing we were all taught in English class about there being no wrong answer? Well, the second part that people don't say is also true. And that is on the flip side, there are infinite, concurrent, correct answers. I get excited talking about this game to my friends who have played it because their interpretations can be vastly different to mine, which gives me a whole new way to look at the game, a whole new universe of meaning to explore. I had this game sold to me with this Discord message.
Going to sound ridiculous saying this about an indie survival horror game, but it's like the fine art of video games. I generally think the way that it plays with its inspirations and source materials is going to expand the possibility of game stories a hell of a lot.
And it does sound ridiculous, but it's not wrong. Signalis is fine art, dripping with cultural and societal context, layers of meaning stacked atop one another, begging to be interpreted and shared. And Rose Engine have done this fantastic thing where they have refused to give their own interpretation of the story or its meaning, because even if they gave the caveat that their interpretation is as valid as mine or yours, they must be aware of the societal power of the word of God. And it would be used to shut down all talk about the game or its meaning, since the one objective truth has been handed down by the authors of the piece. So they've left it open to interpretation the way art in galleries is open to interpretation. So isn't it about time I told you what I interpreted? If yours is different to mine, let me know. I would love to hear it. But without further ado, Signalis is about queerness, uniqueness, and love being acts of rebellion and resistance. About how that very resistance is inevitable and enduring, even if it's the faintest glowing ember under the boot of fascism. It is about how queerness and uniqueness have existed since the dawn of time and will exist until the end of time, and nothing can stop it. It is about hope. So we start from Saturn devouring its sun, a painting found in one of the rooms of the facility. This painting is an image of a totalitarian ruler, Saturn, destroying his children out of fear of them bringing the start of a new world, that they might be unique and new. That is our world. Ariane is the spark of the revolution as she refuses to let herself be happy, to let herself be herself, even when nobody is around to admonish her for it. And here is our starting point. The story during the game is this couple, Ariane and Elster, literally and metaphorically changing the world with queerness and with love, and it manifests as the power of an elder god. Since elder gods are indescribable, and the fascist ideology is one of positioning itself as there is nothing else. So the idea of individuality, queerness, and uniqueness are literally incomprehensible by those inside the system. But they are inevitable. The King in Yellow has always been there. Queerness has always been there. And just like the King, we gain our power from more people being able to comprehend us, to understand us. The final boss against Falk is a very literal fight against the self, with Elster representing the spark of revolutionary thought and Falk being the repression and internalized homophobia, the fear of change and the fear of the new, seeking a retreat to the status quo. The two battle for Elster's self-acceptance, mirroring the internalized conflict with the externalized conflict. And while on its face, Elster fulfilling her promise and killing Ariane is a sad ending, she did so on her terms, on their terms, not on the terms of the oppressors. She did it out of love, not out of being controlled. No matter how hard the world tries to erase uniqueness, queerness, and difference, no matter how hard they try to wipe us out, to other us, to make us erase ourselves, we are inevitable. We have always been here. We are older than this regime, much like the flesh below the plateau of Leng is older than the empire and the silly mining operation. And we will thrive, even if we have to destroy the entire system to do so.